The Legend of Zelda series has seen many successes over its near 40-year lifespan, starting with the Legend of Zelda on the Nintendo Entertainment System to the recent Echoes of Wisdom on Nintendo Switch. But over the years, Nintendo has cancelled some Zelda games, and today I'm going to take a look at some of the lesser known Zelda games explored by Nintendo before they were cancelled. Well, if you enjoyed this video, then hit that subscribe button down below for even more Zelda content here on Trifroce Times, and also you can hit that like button too. The Legend of Zelda series has seen major successes with arguably some of the best games ever made, including one of my personal favourites, A Link to the Past on the Super Nintendo. We've got Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64, Twilight Princess, and also Breath of the Wild on Nintendo Switch. You know, even though Nintendo has seen great success with the Zelda franchise, some Zelda games never saw the light of day and were cancelled at varying stages of development. Well, today we're going to uncover the details of some of these, including direct sequels and also spin-off games. Well, first of all, we've got a Twilight Princess side story. So Shigeru Miyamoto asked the team to explore ways to reuse assets from Twilight Princess to come up with a quick successor, reusing the world and the assets, and this is a similar thing compared to Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. The idea was to create an extra story or side story, and the team started to come up with ideas. However, they grew too large in scope and complexity, and ultimately the idea was shut down and put on the shelf. Well, next up we got a Zelda 2 remake on Super Nintendo. Well, Zelda 2 was a very different game to the first Legend of Zelda adventure on the Nintendo Entertainment System. The Super Nintendo offered more power and capabilities, and Nintendo were planning to remake Zelda 2 for that console. So the Super Nintendo had the Super FX chip, which offered Mode 7 graphics for Super Mario Kart and Star Fox. Nintendo wanted to use this technology with The Legend of Zelda to help bring the franchise into the 3D space. Unfortunately, plans changed, and this idea would be revisited once again with Ocarina of Time years later on the Nintendo 64 console. Plans for a Zelda 2 remake were shelved, and instead Nintendo went ahead and worked on A Link to the Past. Well, next up we got the Zelda Tactics game. So there was once a Zelda Tactics game in the works, and this was with Retro Studios, who Nintendo do quite a lot of work with, including Metroid Prime and the Donkey Kong games. So the Zelda Tactics game was pitched to Nintendo in 2004 with the codename Heroes of Hyrule, and it was planned to launch on the Nintendo DS handheld console. The game would have had 3 playable characters, and it was about you learning about Link battling Ganon. The YouTube channel Did You Know Gaming managed to get the pitch document related to this project, and it revealed some of the details about the game and the story. Heroes of Hyrule would have focused in on a book found by a boy, and the book would evolve over time as more pages were found. New areas and story elements would be unlocked through these found pages, and battles would take the form of a tactical RPG battle, similar to Fire Emblem or Into the Breach. The game would also have traditional Zelda puzzle elements, which sounds really good, but I can't imagine how that would come together. Well, unfortunately, the idea was shelved as Retro Studios was assigned the latest Donkey Kong project. Well, next up we got the Sheikah Action-RPGs. Well, back in 2007, a Sheikah Action-RPG was in development with Retro Studios. The Sheikah had definitely come to the forefront in Zelda lore in recent years with a starring role in Breath of the Wild, but back then much less was known about the secretive tribe. The Sheikah have had a major impact on the series, with Impa coming to mind as Princess Zelda's bodyguard in Ocarina of Time, and all the Sheikah technology found in Breath of the Wild. According to one of the developers on the project, it was described as an experiment gone wrong. Paul Tozur, a programmer on the prototype, said the combat was overly simplistic, describing it like a version of whack-a-mole. Tozur stated in an interview there were 4 or 5 wolves, maybe 6, and they would just be in their idle state waiting to pounce at you. Then they would jump at you one by one and you just go whack. That was literally all it was, just detecting when a player swung the Wii remote. If so, the wolf dies, and if you don't do it correctly, then you take damage. As well as the combat, the game included traversing an overworld, and when the player arrived at a point of interest, the game would transition into a battle sequence, similar to random battles found in Pokemon or JRPGs. Retro Studios worked with Nintendo on a number of titles, including the Metroid Prime trilogy and also Donkey Kong Country. They were prototyping the Sheikah Action-RPG, but then the leadership within Retro Studios changed, and the project was put on the shelf for good. The game was due to explore the origins of the Master Sword, a theme that would be later picked up in Skyward Sword, released in 2011, so perhaps elements of that game did see the light of day, just not in the format they originally intended. Well, next up we got a project called 3D Classics, The Legend of Zelda. So Nintendo worked on 3D versions of classic Zelda games as part of a line called 3D Classics. Nintendo representatives had a working prototype that was shown at E3 2010, however the games were cancelled very early on in development. Well, next up we got Zelda 3. So after Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, Nintendo started working on a concept called Zelda 3. Link would be able to explore 3 locations, and they would all be connected, and the actions taken in one world would affect the other. Shigeru Miyamoto also wanted to implement a party system in Zelda 3, which would be similar to the combat from Dragon Quest. Miyamoto's original plan was to include a party consisting of the protagonist, who's a mixture between an elf and a fighter, a magic user, and a girl. He even revealed that the fairy from The Adventure of Link was intended to be a party member for Zelda 3. So Miyamoto said, "Ever since I started making the first game in the series, I've been saying that the third Zelda will feature a party, one that consists of a protagonist who's a mix between an elf and a fighter, a magic user and a girl. A girl who looked like a little fairy whose role consisted of reconnaissance, like the characters in action games that don't engage in enemies in combat but rather go out and scout the surroundings and return to you safely. It's also fun when action-adventure games let you choose who to send out. That's the sort of thing I'm thinking I'd like to put in Zelda 3. Yeah, ultimately the concept was simplified and 2 worlds were decided upon, and the party system wasn't implemented, and A Link to the Past was born out of these Zelda 3 concepts. Well, next up we've got the Goron Rolling game. So in 2010, Japanese game developer Vanpool started working on another game in the Tingle series after its previous attempt at a Tingle horror game was cancelled. This new game was inspired by Ripen Tingle's Balloon Trip of Love, where we'd use pachinko balls to defeat enemies. Well, Vanpool pitched the idea of a rolling Goron game that would use the touchscreen. Nintendo rejected the idea and suggested Vanpool use another character, and the game ultimately morphed into something else completely called Dylan's Rolling Western, which was a Nintendo DS eShop game about rolling armadillos set in a cowboy western setting. Well, next up we got the Skyward Sword second quest. So Nintendo had planned a second quest for Skyward Sword that would have allowed players to play as Princess Zelda. This would have been a fully playable adventure from Zelda's point of view after she landed on the surface. The idea though was never used, but the setting for the story was used in the cinematic after Skyward Sword's ending. Well, next up we got Ura Zelda. So Nintendo released the disk drive add-on for the Nintendo 64 called the 64 Disk Drive, or the 64 Double D. Nintendo wanted to release a Zelda game on the system because they know Zelda sells consoles and also accessories. The project in question was called Ura Zelda, and it would enhance the already excellent Ocarina of Time. Shigeru Miyamoto wanted a persistent world where if you chopped down trees, it would stay there, or footprints would stay in the mud. Unfortunately, the 64DD wasn't a success, and Ura Zelda was paused. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom did bring back some of the planned enhancements, plus loads of info got leaked from Nintendo in 2020, releasing loads of previously unseen plans. IG Aonuma was given the responsibility for Ura Zelda. He wasn't too keen on the idea of remixing old Ocarina of Time dungeons, and was given permission to create an entirely new Zelda game, and this would end up releasing as Majora's Mask. Aonuma directed Majora's Mask, while Ura Zelda was developed in parallel. It was designed to use the existing Ocarina of Time cartridge, in conjunction with the 64DD add-on. It would include remix dungeons, different loot locations and new story events, and Miyamoto also wanted to include some form of network technology. Ura Zelda would eventually release as Ocarina of Time the Master Quest on GameCube in 2003, and that would be a pre-order bonus for Wind Waker to help pre-orders of that game. However, many of the planned features were cut or cancelled, including a persistent world with permanent consequences of the player's actions, new story events, more quests involving the masks and ability to use the Game Boy camera to create masks for Link, and also the use of this network technology. Well, finally we've got Wind Waker 2, so Nintendo originally planned a sequel to Wind Waker. They had a similar idea to Ocarina and Majora's Mask. They wanted to reuse some of the assets from Wind Waker because development time and costs, they'd started to rise on the more powerful platform. So Eiji Aonuma and the team started working on Wind Waker 2. However, there was a problem. Wind Waker saw a backlash, especially in North America, with calls for a much more realistic Zelda game similar to Ocarina of Time, but using the graphical capabilities of the GameCube. Wind Waker didn't sell well in North America, and that made the Japanese developer very nervous. So Eiji Aonuma would discover this was because the Wind Waker's cartoonish visuals had alienated the upper teen audience, and that represented the typical Zelda player in North America, and that was the series' largest market at the time. Nintendo was already planning the next Zelda game for the Nintendo GameCube, and it was tentatively titled The Wind Waker 2. The game would use the same cel-shaded visual style as The Wind Waker, but would take place on land, with Link riding around on horseback like Ocarina of Time. During the initial stages of planning, the team would find that Toon Link's proportions didn't really lend itself well to riding on a horse, and while an adult version of Toon Link had been contemplated for the original Wind Waker, the team felt this wasn't really the solution that they were looking for. Wind Waker 2 was ultimately cancelled, and a new Zelda game was built from the ground up and would eventually release as Twilight Princess. Concept art of Link as an adult in Wind Waker does exist, and also Midna was originally planned in the same graphical cel-shaded style, but ultimately they transferred all the graphics over to that more realistic style for the final product in Twilight Princess. Well, let me know in the comments what you think, but that is it today for the cancelled games in the Legend of Zelda series, and as always, thank you so much for watching or for listening. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below for even more Zelda content here on Trifroce Times. Thanks again, and I'll see you soon. Well, this video is brought to you by Trifroce Times Backstage. This is available through Patron or YouTube membership, and you're going to get exclusive benefits, plus you'll be able to go above and beyond to support Trifroce Times. Free content is core to Trifroce Times, and you can continue to enjoy these videos that you know and love. However, if you want to enjoy the benefits like early access, our community Discord, shoutouts in the credits of videos, content polls and exclusive videos, then select the tier that is right for you and join Trifroce Times Backstage today. So help me make Trifroce Times be even bigger and better, plus you're going to get some added benefits for a small fee every month. Well, thank you for listening, and now it is time to go back to the video.